I used to do lots of things.
I used to do things and I'd say things and Jesus I was evil. Take things and break things and Jesus I was evil. I never shook, baby.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Because I mean, we're I know we're kind of speed running some of these stories a little bit here. The Hollywood Adventures is the
Yeah.
theme.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of, at least that was what we set out here for. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so that was 2002.
Yeah.
And after various adventures, and I'm sure there's a couple things like the ballet thing. Turned out that my girlfriend, ballet instructor slash girlfriend at the time, took me up to San Francisco to meet her former teacher, who used to be the head of the Joffrey in Chicago, the Joffrey Ballet, like big
Okay.
big time, one of the big American ballet companies.
Yeah.
Because apparently, uh, like I was a beginner, I was just learning, but she took me up to take his class, and so we drove up to San Francisco. Excuse me, and after the class, she introduced me to him and was like, and then she said something that they had a quick little chat, and then he asked me, he's like, so tell me, how old are you? And I was like 27, or something like that, and he's like, and where'd you grow up? And I was like, Northern Canada. He's like, not a lot of ballet up there. I was like, no, none. And he was like, we missed another one. So it turns out that apparently, like, I was a natural at ballet. They were like, yeah, you have exactly the physique we're looking for. You have the rhythm, you have the musicality, you have all the things we want. We discovered you when you were like 10 years old.
Yeah.
In ballet classes.
Yeah.
You'd be doing pas de deux like on the national stage right now. Like you would have been like, you have all the things and you do it. You're like, even there's this thing that apparently good ballet dancers like go into this zone, this thing, and they're like, yeah, you go right in there. We can tell.
Yeah.
And they're like, but you're way too old. You're way too old. You missed the boat. And
God.
And I was like, oh, well, but that's neat, right? Because I grew up in a town where dancing, if you're a male, dancing was like verboten, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, it was like the town from Footloose where no one's allowed to have fun. So that was kind of interesting, yet another missed opportunity, I guess. But it's cool. I still am not comfortable dancing. It's ingrained in me, I guess, the trauma from my youth.
Yeah.
But learned how to do it.
So it seems like so much of your career is just like typified by bad timing. It's just like like 9/11,
right?
And then not being discovered early enough, not being gay enough,
Right.
If they'd have caught you a little bit earlier when you were going through that gay phase. No, I'm kidding.
If only I'd known about non-binary, I could have chosen that. Because what is gay, really?
Yeah.
Like
it's a social construct. Yeah,
you're as gay as your last thought, or as
exactly.
As your last thought, or gay and straight. Does it even exist? I don't know.
Yeah.
Everyone's just confused.
Right.
So yeah, no, it's been a interesting ride of like, you get there and you're like, hey, and they're like, the party just ended. Shit,
No.
Or you're going and they're like, the doors aren't open yet, and then you run out of steam. So which I did. I ran out of steam and was running out of money and running out of time, so I had to leave. And the message was, you need to go do more things and build up your career more, and then come back. Right? That's what Cassie and Eloise at William Morris said to me. He's like, you need to go do more things and come back. He's like, you've got, you could be like a young Redford type in your looks, and you've got some talent as a writer here. We could work with this, but you need to become somebody. So I went back to Canada and was like, all right, how do you become somebody from here?
Yeah.
That's another nut to crack. So I started doing independent films and, stopped working for other people's movies and started trying to make my own, which is really interesting. As soon as you do that, you're no longer employable to a large degree. like if you want to like make your little indie film as like a crew person or like a director,
Mhm.
they'll forgive you that. But if you want to like be the creative,
Right.
be the producer or the director or the actor or stuff, all of a sudden now you're the Australians call it tall poppy syndrome. It's like you stick your head up out of the field of poppies, it's a tall poppy, and it gets cut off.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people kind of, it's a weird Canadian thing. They kind of so a lot of people want to support you. They're like, yeah, go. And then, but at the same time, there's all this like, screw you, you're a sellout, and we hate you because you're doing the thing that they want to do and
Right.
maybe don't have the courage to do. So there's a lot of envy and bitterness and enmity.
Yeah.
So a lot of people try to cut you down. But yeah, so started making indie films. I made a feature film that I wrote and directed and acted in called The House. And it's funny because that movie was inspired by Kevin Smith's Clerks. Right? Kevin Smith made Clerks. It kind of was a fun, quirky movie with a bunch of interesting characters that kind of put him on the map as a writer and as a director of making movies with interesting, quirky characters and cool dialogue. So I thought, well, I'll do that, right? And of course, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck and those guys were they were all friends with him, right? Like they were all part of the same Red Lake, New Jersey gang, right? Like they all knew each other.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, by the time I made that movie, that 1990s indie scene was over.
Bad timing again.
Yeah, it was like the studios had kind of snapped up all the indies. Remember they started their own shingles? They had like, remember Fox had all the baby foxes, like Searchlight and Fox Atomic and and they did this, I think, to kill the indie scene, right? All the independent film scene was like eating their lunch.
Yeah.
And then they're like, we'll create independent film shingles at the studios. They sign on all the independent filmmakers who were like eating their lunch. And now they own them. And then they shut them all down. By the mid 2000s, when I'm like, making independent films, they're like, no, the whole world had moved on to what I call torture porn. It was all the blood and guts slasher movies like Saw, the Saw series, Saw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 million.
Hostel and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And all those movies, right? That was what was popular. That was what was making money. That was what you could get sold. You made a indie art house film about a bunch of crazy, weird characters squatting in a boarded up old house. Like, no one wants to see that. Right. Even though like we sold out our premiere at the Toronto Independent Film Festival committee. Toronto International Film Festival Committee, TIFF. They were like, look, this movie's not big enough for TIFF. But we will program. We're partnered up with this other. It's called the Canadian Filmmakers Festival. So they programmed my movie into there for our premiere, and our first night sold out. So we booked a second night. Nice. The audiences enjoyed it, had fun. Yeah. It was a great. It was an actor's piece. It was fun. It has a little bit of everything. It was like it's a crazy little movie. It's got some sex. It's got some violence. It's got a cop beating up a naked hooker. It's got like all kind. It's got some really great music in it. Like we really put a lot of work into that movie. Yeah. It was bigger than Clerks. It wasn't like a tiny little movie. I tried to make more of like a serious sort of art house, but it was a dramedy, a dark comedy drama, art house type film. And those were just not in. It was no longer the 1990s. No one wanted that. Yeah. And so that sat on a shelf for a long time. And we actually I did a recut of it a year or two ago, and we re-released it as sort of the House of the Director's cut. So
nice.
Yeah, it's on Tubi. If anyone wants to go watch it, they can watch it for free. Just go to tubitv.com, I think, and or they have an app, and it's there. And if you watch it, then some ads play maybe, and I get like a nickel or something. I don't know.
The little residuals or whatever, little royalties.
Something. Yeah. But no, like the more people go watch the movie, then someday I might be able to afford cat food. So that
well, send me a link to it, and I'll put it in the description. And I can help put it out there too. So
yeah, because the more Yeah, so I directed that one, and then a good friend of mine had gone to London Film School in the UK,
Hmm.
and he wanted to do his first feature, and so we made his movie. As another one called Gangster Exchange,
Hmm.
and it was a indie buddy action flick. It was kind of like, it was basically the Japanese yakuza, the Japanese mob, figured out how to turn heroin into ceramics.
Yeah.
And so they made a toilet out of heroin worth $6.2 million and shipped it to New York City
Yeah.
to the Bosnian mob. And and it was interesting because the director friend of mine, his family background is Bosnian, and that movie, because we had all these sort of South Slavs working, and this was, the mid 2000s, late 2000s.
Hmm.
Only not that long ago, all the Slavic people had been fighting each other with the collapse of Yugoslavia, right? Like the
Yeah.
Serbs and the Bosnians and the Croatians and everybody was at each other's throats there back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And here we are, a bunch of people in Toronto, all from different all those different groups who had just recently hated each other. But, the next generation, having grown up in North America, all working together, right? And making this fun movie about these crazy Bosnian gangsters and the Japanese yakuza and this toilet, and it's a comedy. I mean, it's a toilet made of heroin. It's guns, thugs, and toilet made of drugs, I think was the tagline. And so we made that. That's also on Tubi, but there we go. Plug my movies.
Yeah, nice.
But yeah, so I did that, and started building a reputation as an independent film producer, and yeah, and then finally went back to Hollywood in the mid to late 2000s. Took my second run at the place, and this was with, I had through making my independent films. You have to raise money. You can't, like, I mean, was it Robert Rodriguez when used himself for medical testing? And you do be a lab rat, so he could raise money to make his movie
for El Mariachi.
Yeah, right. So I had a buddy of mine who was a lab rat. I knew this actor back in Toronto that was what he did for a living. He went and did medical studies, and he was like, "Look, when I grow a third arm or a second head, I'll stop. But in the meantime, it's he was making like $40,000 a year as the lab rat."
Yeah, it pays really well, and I think Robert Rodriguez, because he famously made El Mariachi for I think it was like $11,000 or something like that. But he made $8,000 just from doing that. Like he made like most of the money just by doing it for like a month or something. And it was for like some kind of lotion or hair product.
Right. Yeah,
I think he said the one side effect that he did have was that his hair fell out. I mean, it grew back. It just but it's just sort of like, I'm gonna be hairless for a while or something like that.
Right.
But it's like, I get to fund most of my movie with this. So
yeah, it's worth the weird rash if I get to make my movie.
And because he was in isolation, because he had they were watching him. He was there for several weeks or a month or something. He was like, well, I'm gonna write the script. I don't have any distractions, so it's actually not a bad gig. You can leverage that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I didn't really want to do that. So I went the old traditional route and started raising money and trying to meet with investor types and saying, like, if you put some money into my movie, and these are people that they invest in normal things, right? Like what's that show? The one with Mark Cuban on it, where people
Shark Tank.
Yeah. So these are Shark Tank. They're angels and venture capitalists, and they invest in Shark Tank type stuff, like the new product or the better mousetrap, as they like to say, the new soft drink or whatever. And I come along, I'm like, hey, how about we do a movie? And they're like, look, we're not looking for a tax write-off, buddy. I was like, well, no, here's the thing. And again, I was upfront with them and said, like, look, this is a flyer. This is the high risk part of your portfolio, but it'll be fun.
Yeah. Right.
And that was the sales pitch. It wasn't like, you're going to make millions of dollars if this movie takes off. It could be the next Big Fat Greek Wedding that blows up, because that movie was famously made for not a lot of money and it made a ton.
Yeah.
But this was not going to be that. This was like, look, I'm. Well, first of all, I was told by my lawyers that you're not really allowed to do that when you go raising money. You can't give what they call forward-looking financial information, FALFI. You can't say this is going to make this much money and this, that, and give financial projections.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't pan out, then you've committed fraud.
Yeah.
So little pro tip for all the people out there raising money. So what you do have to put is on your business prospectus, this business plan that you're going to put in front of the money people, is you put skull and crossbones across the top with abandon hope, all ye who invest here. You will likely lose all your money. This is a terrible idea. Don't do it. But if you still want to do it, it'd be really awesome. Right. And would you put, $5,000 or $10,000 or, whatever into a little independent film? And if you can find enough people, and again, there's a limit the number of people you can do. I think 50. I don't know. Check your local financial laws. But at a certain point, you've made a public offering. If you exceed that number, and that's a whole other. Now you're into the securities world, so you don't want to do that. Yeah. But if it's a small enough number, and you can gather enough, enough people willing to take a chance on a piece of art or an artistic endeavor, then you can raise money to make an independent film. It's not impossible.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. I mean, I gained 15 pounds from dinners, going and meeting people for dinner and like they would pay because they knew I was the starving actor with, without a pot to piss in. So they were like, well, we'll cover the dinner, young man. And you tell us about this movie. Right. And met with really interesting people. Like people were like, look, I don't invest in this kind of stuff, but this sounds really interesting, but no, like I invest in, computers and technology. You're weird, get out, but it's nice to meet you. They're not mean, by the way. So I want other people to know this who would ever go out to try to raise money. This, what was that show? Cuban? I can always forget that.
Shark Tank.
Remember, like in the first few seasons, they were always jerks to everybody.
Yeah.
The investors aren't like that. They ham that up for TV to make it more exciting. They were totally. Like, it's like Donald Trump and you're fired. They wanted to have that like vibe,
Yeah.
You meet with these people, and I think they did a real disservice to the money raising world, like people who are young and want to try to get their project off the ground because now they're all scared they're going to go get someone who's going to be mean to them.
Right.
So they don't even leave their homes to go and try.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't want to go out there and like they have a great idea and they got a good work ethic and they have everything they need, but they're timid, right?
Yeah.
And they're scared. They don't want and you know what? When you're putting your whole world on your whole like you've invested yourself in what you're working on, and you put it in front of somebody and they take a big steaming crap all over it, I think it hurts and it's discouraging and a lot of people just don't even. They're just scared to go out there and now I had an advantage because I'd been a starving actor for a number of years and been like auditioning and like next, right? Like, so you get rejected a lot. And so at that point, the way I looked at it was, I was giving them the opportunity to say yes, as opposed to worrying about them saying no. If I don't put it in front of them, then by default, that's a no.
Exactly. You're
saying no for them. Why would I deprive all these lovely people of the opportunity to say yes?
Right.
So you just but you be honest, put it in front of them and say, look, I'm not promising you $1 million. I'm not promising you a moneymaker. We're trying to make a movie. We're trying to make some art, something cultural. Are you interested? And, and the people who are going to do it are the kind of people who can afford to lose $5-10 grand.
Right.
And to them, it's, they're a sophisticated investor and they're like, yeah, I get it. And if it doesn't make money, then they flush it down the toilet. They write it off against their other investments. And, it's a tax deduction for them.
Right. Yeah. So,
and if you can meet one, again, any young filmmakers out there, foolish enough to watch this episode.
Yeah.
If you meet one person who has a bit of money or is a member of a country club or somebody, they know all the others. Everybody knows it. It's all networking, right? You try to find somebody. Like, do you have a distant cousin or rich uncle who knows some people? Oh yeah, I know Steve or Billy or Sue that they put some money into vitamin water and made a lot of money, or whatever. Yeah. So and they know all the other people who did. So if that's, you just get out there and ask, hey, does anybody know anybody who could put my grandmother put $5 grand into my movie.
Oh, wow.
Out of her retirement nest egg. She had a tiny little pension. My grandfather was a steel worker, so they had this tiny little pension, and she had her savings. And her whole savings was $50,000. and she put $5,000 into my movie. So friends and family, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's investors ask. They'll be like, well, did your friends and family put up anything?
Yeah.
So go to them first, and then you can go to the investors and say, well, I've raised $15,000, $20,000 of the 100 I need,
Right.
for
Right.
my little indie film.
Yeah.
And then go, okay, you asked mom, you asked grandma,
Yeah.
all right.
Well, it probably makes you look good too, because it shows that you're a hustler. You're out there. You're asking. You're scrolling through your Rolodex and
Yeah.
seeing. So
Anyone you can, and that that somebody, if mom won't even support you, then why should I, right? Is the investor, right? If your grandma won't give you $5, then why should I give you $5?
right.
And if your grandma doesn't have $5 and you say, look, my grandma's poor, she doesn't have $5, I still asked her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I'm asking you again. They're not mean people. These
Right.
investor types, they're just regular people who've done well for themselves. Some of them, they made some money, like Elon made some PayPal money, and look what he's gone on to do, right?
Yep.
So some of these were, they were fortunate to make a few bucks, and now they can do some things with it. And you're just giving them the opportunity to lose 10 grand,
Right.
or whatever, right?
Right. Well, that's it's interesting, when you take that sort of mindset and how you can kind of take advantage of a difficult situation like that. It reminds me a little bit of so Tarantino. He went on Joe Rogan and he told a story about he was Reservoir Dogs was making the film festival rounds, and so Harvey Weinstein. So this is back with Miramax, I think, that released it. And so Harvey Weinstein said, "Hey, too many people are walking out of the theater during the torture scene where he cuts the guy's ear off and douses them in gasoline. Because we got to cut that scene because women especially are walking out of that scene. And if we're going to do a wide release, I don't want to lose that demographic." And Tarantino said, "No, it's my movie. That's the movie I wanted to make, so I'm not going to change it." And so Harvey just kind of stood there and was thinking for a moment. And he goes, "All right, we're going to leave that scene in, and from now on, I'm going to be known as the guy who let Tarantino keep that scene in." So it's
Right.
just like kind of maneuvering the situation a bit, right? Like,
well, and if how do you spin it, right? And setting aside Harvey Weinstein's other issues in Hollywood, back in those days in the 90s, Bob and Harvey were like kind of the only guys who they had this knack for identifying new up and coming filmmaking talent.
Yeah.
It used to be the head of the studios, the executives. They knew how to identify it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this person has it.
Yeah.
And Bob and Harvey were good at that. They could select. By the way, just to touch on just briefly, I feel like I was a little bit flippant about my investors. You're hoping to make money. You try to make their money back. Yeah. I'm still trying to make their money back. That's why I was plugging my movie, because like I said, the movie got shelved and got stuck in the doldrums for a long time. And these are all nice people. Again, like I said, they're nice people who took a chance on you, and you want to do right by them. Yeah. At least get their money back. If not an extra, that they can make a little bit. At least they could beat the inflation rate.
Right, exactly.
Right. Yeah, so you are not giving them the opportunity to lose money. You're giving them an opportunity to help you make something meaningful, and hoping that you can get them their money back. And if you do, then they'll might put it back in for another one. That's really, you tried to do right by them so that they want to keep going. Yeah. And so just wanted to go back and touch on that. So in case any of them are watching, they don't think that I don't care. I've agonized for years over the, I've never, like how to make, how to make that work. And how to sort of do right by them, because you really, when people sign on to your project, it's you really appreciate it, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to make anything. And Bob and Harvey Weinstein, or Harvey Weinstein's definitely not gonna be coming along helping you make a movie these days. And is anyone in Hollywood doing that? Is that no? Like, I thought for a while that maybe like Millennium, like Avi Lerner and those guys over at Millennium, but now they're just kind of like work with their friends, it seems, and like, are there any independent film producers out there like finding the next generation of cool filmmakers?
I don't know. I would have said, maybe somebody from A24. But they recently, I think it was just within the last year, saying that they said that they're gonna start venturing more into like franchises. I think they picked up some major horror franchise. I don't know if it was like Halloween or Friday the 13th, but it's sort of like, oh, you guys for a while there, you guys were putting out really cool independent stuff, even if your films weren't that profitable. At least there was something about. But now it's like, okay, they're starting to venture more into. I think there was some kind of business thing where it's like they got a lot of investor money, but with the promise of like, but you need to start developing like franchises and series, existing IPs. So
which is what happened with Bob and Harvey, right? Didn't they end up making Lord of the Rings with Peter Jackson? Were they not involved in that like $200 million thing? Like they kind of.
I thought that was New Line Cinema.
Yeah, but I thought that was Weinsteins were involved in that, but
maybe
or something. Anyway, they graduated out of picking up little indies and making their dreams come true.
Yeah.
But you're hoping the next indie producers would come up and do that, and it sounds like I guess A24 is now looking for that big money making franchise, right? It's the same thing with like the Saw movies, right? Like those guys are like, hey, we got a formula, let's milk the hell out of it, And
Yep.
yeah, it's. I thought the streamers, I thought like the Netflix and Hulu and all these streaming companies would be the new like home for the indies, right? Because they have they already have the money because they have subscribers. So it's not like they need to make a movie, spend a bunch of money on it, and then hope that people buy tickets.
Mm-hmm.
They have their subscribers. They have they got their audience built in. I mean, it's funny because that's actually an old model from the early 20th century.
Yeah.
I was doing some research on these big film organizations, these big cultural organizations, and a lot of them started off as theater organizations back in the like 1910s and 20s.
Yeah.
And those theater organizations would put on stage productions. And when they put on stage productions, they didn't put on the show and try to sell tickets to make their money back, right? Because you got to make costumes, you got to hire actors, you got to feed people while they're doing rehearsals, you got to like pay people. No, they had subscribers. They had patrons who subscribed to their season of shows.
Yeah. So
they pay for the year in advance. They had their tickets. Their seats were already reserved for them. And that's the way that they built their theater groups, their theater troupes. They had a group of people who signed on every year and made sure that they had enough money to make those shows. And then any additional tickets they sold, that's where everyone made a little bit of money and could finally pay themselves.
Right.
But that's how they got going. And I thought that streaming companies were going to be that because they weren't beholden to advertisers. So you didn't have to edit your movies. You Tarantino could keep the scene. Yeah. Right? Because you don't, the people from Pepsi Cola or Tide or, some family brand like, Huggies diapers aren't going to be like, no, we don't want our commercial playing during this bloody, gory movie. Yeah. Like that's something we have that I'm seeing kind of come back now with a lot of this advertising driven stuff. It's like, like I know a lot of movies that go out on like platforms like YouTube stuff, right? Like they're now having to edit themselves a little bit, cut things out because they're like, well, we won't monetize if it's got too many bad words or whatever, right?
Right. I think Apple for a while was starting to kind of establish itself as a place for like short films, where like that was a way that once it did the film festival circuit, that was a place that you can make a little bit of money back, where it's like somebody could watch it, could rent it for $1 or something like that, and then you get a small percentage of that. They were doing it for a while, but I don't know. And the other reason I know about that is because I read about it in a book. Is like how to be a short filmmaker or something. But the book was written like in 2012, so I don't. So I don't think I'm pretty sure.
No, and short films have never been really financially viable.
Right.
But it would be nice if there was a platform out there where you could at least make your money back, even though you're not going to make big profits off it. If you could at least see $5 come back your way, anything.
Yeah.
Because even making a short film, I mean, it costs. Filmmaking is a very expensive habit.
Yep.
It's even with digital tech and all the things you can do these days, it's not a cheap date.
Yeah.
Especially if you want to do it like if you want to do a good job. And here's one of the conundrums of independent filmmaking. You make your little indie film, and let's say you spent $5 grand on it, or 50 grand, or 100 grand, or whatever. You are now out there. The viewers don't know this. The average moviegoer, the average person, some of them are sophisticated. They know what an indie film is. But a lot of people out there, the people who are writing reviews on IMDb or on Amazon or whatever, they're just some person out there who watched a movie. And they don't know that you didn't have $50 million from Warner Brothers.
Right.
They're comparing you to the movie that had $50 million from Warner Brothers. And, you know, your movie's not going to look as good as that because you only had $50,000 from grandma and Uncle Steve and the neighbor down the road and your dentist. And you know, you added it all up and that's all you had.
Yeah.
And you can't, they talk about, you know, you read all these like filmmaking books and like you make your own movie and, you know, what was Rodriguez's book?
Rebel Without a Cause, or
Rebel
Without a Crew, I think.
Rebel Without a Crew, right? And it's like, you know, and then like the end, was it the Lloyd Kaufman Make Your Own Damn Movie or whatever?
Yeah.
And you know, and they talk about like putting dollars on the screen. You're trying to make your movie look as expensive as possible. Like you make the best quality picture you can, have the most professional performances you can. And of course, you're new, you're young, you're working with young actors, you're working with young crew. So things aren't going to be polished like a $50 million studio film.
Yeah.
The audience doesn't know that, and the audience doesn't care. A lot of the audience is like, I just watch movies, and this one looked a little rough around the edges. So you're going to get 4 stars out of 10 on IMDb instead of, you know, even though your movie may be quite good, but it doesn't look like a professional big budget movie. So that's sort of like the indie trap. For a brief period in the 1990s, remember Dogma 95, that whole movement?
Yeah.
So there was a very brief period in the 1990s where making grainy, crappy-looking movies was considered cool.
Yeah.
But it lasted all of 5 minutes, and the studio shut that down pretty fast.
Yeah. That was that Lars von Trier was part of that whole thing. Yeah. Yeah.
And they kind of went a little overboard. They were like intentionally making their movies look bad on purpose.
Right.
The worse it looks, the more artistic you are, right? Like it was like when Dara leaked, right? Was that like from Zoolander? Like, let's make everybody look crappy. Like, and you're like, no, come on, like, no makeup, no lighting. Everybody, look at the shine. Yeah, it's real, you know.
Yeah.
Greasy forehead. Yeah.
I remember it was I read somewhere that because I think one of the stipulations of that thing was that you could only use like natural lighting. You could not use studio lighting, right? But then somebody admitted to like, well, we did have to like get one light for a shot or something like that. I don't remember who it was, but it was all it was like a scandal, but it was sort of like, yeah, I'm sorry, I broke the rule. I actually had to rent a studio light for that.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, right? Okay, so a very simple filmmaking thing, right? Is you'll notice like we're talking and see that little flicker in my eyes right now?
Yeah.
That little flicker thing, that little light there, that I did that on purpose. Because if there isn't a tiny little bit of light in the eyes, like hang on, if it's gone, no, they're still there. I got too many lights going on here. Anyway, you can't see the character's emotion.
Right.
So if you're doing only natural lighting and a character turns away and you're shooting them and they're in shadow, their eyes just become these dark pits of nothing, especially if they're like me and have deep set eyes, you know, Slavic features, whatever. Then they lose everything, and then you can't see any emotion, you can't see anything.
Isn't there a term for that? It was like dead gaze or something like that.
Yeah. And I remember like you know, I've had arguments with cinematographers over that who like want everything to be natural and motivated, and I was like, come on, like it's different approaches, different philosophies of art, and my view is as coming from it from an actor performance standpoint, where I think character and emotion and what's going on, like if you don't see it in the eyes, you're not getting the performance.
Right.
And at the end of the day, if that means a tiny little tiny light somewhere that you sneak in, well, what if there's no natural light source from that angle? I'm like, it's a movie. It's heightened. The audience expects that. If you don't give them that, they're going to be like, I didn't connect with the character.
Yep. No, absolutely. I mean, if you watch any historical film, especially if it takes place at night before electricity, those rooms are still exceptionally well lit And it's just like, it wasn't until like Stanley Kubrick was like, even that he like, because he wanted to shoot using only candlelight.
Right.
But in
Yeah.
order to do that, he had to get a massive lens that NASA uses for. It's like, I want it to be as naturalistic as possible. But if you use like a regular studio lens, it's gonna be super dark. You're not gonna be able to see anything. But I mean, like, no one else has used that lens as far as I know. So when you watch any historical film, it's like that room at night with just candles would not be that bright. So it's like
no, and there's always a cheat. Like you see scenes in film and on television where it's candles flickering. They're in the cave with the vampire or whatever, and and there's some general light coming, some soft, and they use the screens and the shadow, but they've lit it. So that you can at least, especially with digital shooting, like digitally, if you don't have even a little bit of light, you just end up with that noise, that digital noise in the background, and you got it's way less forgiving than film. Film with like if you're on the right stop, you can do some low light stuff. But yeah, digital, you get all that noise in the background, and it's hard. I mean, you can clean it up now with AI, but for a long time you couldn't. You just end up with a crappy looking movie that was grainy, and the audience didn't connect with, because they're like, I saw the character talking, but none of it felt real because I couldn't see their eyes. That's my view. Based film 101. It's in the eyes. Actually, one of my actors from my movie, and I won't say which one, from my movie The House, one time a few years later, he watched this movie Team America. Remember, with the puppets?
Yeah.
And he said, I watched this movie with puppets in it, and hey buddy, and they had the light in the eyes, I could see it glitter, and he said, and there was like an emotional scene. I felt I was getting emotional because I'm like, and then I realized, I'm like, wait a second. And this is an actor, right? He's like, I'm an actor. He's like, and I'm watching these puppets, and I'm like, oh my God, they're so real. And I was like, and he's like, and I remembered you talking about this light in the eyes thing. And it's like, it's true. He's like, and then I realized that I'm just a puppet. And he was having this whole existential crisis about how Team America's puppets were better well, not that they were better actors than him, but like that they could make him puppet believable.
Yeah.
Right. If they glinted the eyes just right, and they had like these moments, and like, and he's like, and he's like, so like, am I just the puppet, and like you're the puppet master, the director? I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Well, a little, but
Right.
but no, like the actor does bring a lot to it, but music, mood, lighting, all of these things do contribute to the dramatic moment.
Yeah. Well, speaking of like, the light in the eye thing, I know that it's often done in movies when a character dies with their eyes open. Like what they'll often do is like they'll that little glimmer, they'll lower it, like they'll start to dim it as the character dies, just to give the extra little bit of like that last bit of life that is just left
dead in the dead eyes. Yeah, right. And this reminds me, getting back to a Hollywood Adventures story of sorry, excuse me, too much soda here. Sorry, I have a dog that wants attention here. So if you see me leaning, it's just giving him some scratches. He's not well. He's at almost 14. This dog, and he's. It might be next week. It might be tomorrow. Like we're at the point. So I'm trying to give him as much love as possible.
Right.
But anyway, another sort of anecdote from my adventures. Talk about the light in the eyes and getting the performance. And so one of my mentors, so I'd already mentioned Leonard Kaufman as a writer, director, mentor, and he gave me a lot of advice and helped me sort of with my writing and storytelling. And another person. So when I was a starving actor in Toronto back in the, like, I think this was like in 2000. This is before I went to LA the first time. I was so poor. I was like waiting tables. Before I did the web design thing, I'd given up the government job and was like, I'm going to go star and be an actor. And much to everybody, my family's dismay, That's all great.
No.
An artist in the family.
Yeah.
How disappointing. And I wanted to take a Shakespearean scene study course, and there was this course on offer, and it was like, I can't remember how much it cost. It wasn't even that much. It was like $40 or something, for like a couple weeks, once a week for 3 weeks, just a crash course.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have $40. I was living on tuna and broccoli and anything cheap, and I thought, well, I'm a writer. I'll try to write something. I mean, I'd already read Shakespeare. Like when I was a kid, like I said, I grew up in the North, and I was bored, really bored. So I'd already read like almost all I had this big giant, almost big thick books, the complete works of William Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And I plowed through it over like winter.
Mm.
I was too young to remember most of it now, so I've had to go back and reread it over the years. But so I was familiar with the Elizabethan style of language, the meter, the iambic pentameter, and the verse. And I thought, well, I can't afford this course because I was just taking acting courses. Anything I could afford, anything I could do, I was just trying to train. And so I thought, well, what if I could just write something, right, and learn that way? So, and I had watched this documentary about Lucretia Borgia, who everyone knows now because of the show The Borgias, but they only kind of know because that was a very salacious story. And so I had been a history student, so I thought, well, I'll go research this character, this Lucretia Borgia. She sounds really interesting. Victor Hugo wrote a book about her, Lucretia Borgia and the Poison Ring or something. She was known as this, like, history's like evil temptress, right? But this documentary had an interesting spin on it. It said, actually, she wasn't the evil one. She wasn't any of that.
Right.
It was just, this is her historic reputation, is because her reputation, it had been embellished to make it scandalous, but partly because her father was the Pope. And like the Pope had 7 children and a mistress. His mistress, Giulia Farnese was her name. Her nickname among Italians, I'm like, well, I guess there was no Italy at the time, but the people in Rome who lived in Rome in that day referred to her as the Bride of Christ, because everyone knew she was banging the Pope, right? Like it was an open secret, it was an open joke.
Yeah.
So the Pope had 7 children. Rodrigo Borgia was Pope Alexander VI. His son Cesare Borgia was like the Duke of Rome. He'd set his son up as like the Duke of Rome, and like they had an army. It was pretty interesting. Anyway, and Lucretia was, they were selling her. They were not sorry. There you go. They were selling her off. They were auctioning her off basically. For political alliances, like a marriage, because that's what they did, the noble families, right? You were a noble child, a daughter, a son, a second son, whatever. We're going to marry you off to these people in exchange for their support in this war that we're going to have, or in support what they're going to send troops to help defend us. So anyway, Lucretia was maligned by history, was the thesis of this documentary, and I thought that was interesting. So I went and researched her and did a lot of historical research on her life, and wrote a play called Lucretia. And it was an Elizabethan style, Shakespearean style play in 5 acts in Elizabethan verse, or at least my attempt at Elizabethan verse.
Yeah.
And I remember and I had written it before I went to LA in 2002. And my literary agent was like, this is a great story, but it's a play in verse. Nobody wants that, right? And he's like, if this could be a screenplay, I could shop that around. So like I said, my landlady said, what are you doing up there pounding away? I was like, well, I rewrote it as a screenplay. Yeah. And Lou took it out to a lot of places. He took it at the time, Mel Gibson's company, Icon, was doing a lot. They were doing like The Passion of the Christ. They were doing some, it was a little too salacious. It wasn't Catholic enough for them.
Right.
But a few other places, and he came back to me and said, people love your script. They love this Lucretia script, but the problem is it's hard to sell a script by David Krae, who nobody's ever heard of, especially because Neil Jordan is pitching his Borgia project right now all over town, which he ended up teaming up with the people who made the Tudors, and that became the Borgias.
Yeah.
So he said, look, you're going to have to wait until he's done his project, and then it gets produced, and then maybe 10 years go by, and the whole Borgia thing cools off, and then they'll be ready for another Borgia project, and that's when you shop it again. And he said, oh, you know, and I was like, wow. So in the meantime, I turned it into a novel and put that on. You people who have Amazon Kindle can go buy that and read it if they want. And I had submitted it to into a screenwriting competition at the Beverly Hills Film Festival, and it won their Golden Palm Award for Best Script in 2007.
Oh wow.
So you know, it's a good story, but it's sitting on my shelf waiting for, you know, everyone to forget about Neil Jordan's Borgia project, which was very salacious and just more of the same. You know, I mean, it was entertaining, but again, didn't really do justice to this character who I think, a real person who lived, who was historically maligned by all this stuff. So they went with the salacious again. Because mine was still pretty salacious, but more based in the historical record. Right. And it doesn't paint her as like an evil temptress whore. Right. So, you know, it treats her actually as, starts her off as an ingenue, and then she sort of wises up to what her father and brother, their sort of machinations and what they've been up to. So yeah, so there's another little Hollywood humble moment.
And also bad timing, like we're just
right, like... always bad timing. Yeah, it's you know, making forays into Hollywood is it is a humbling experience. There's so many hurdles, so many sort of things that are, you know, and of course friends who, you know, think they're doing you a favor by telling you how hard it's going to be and how all the pitfalls, and you're like, yeah, I'm aware, thanks for all the encouragement, you know. Yeah, my ADD's kicking in here. I can't remember how we got sidetracked onto that, but yeah, so Adventures in Hollywood. So I went back to Canada, made some movies, raised some money. I'd worked with a number of other producers. I worked with this one guy who was raising money to do a slate of 12 films. And I was like a junior producer at the time. I was learning. I'd done a little indie film. I knew how to make a film budget. I kind of knew how to do a shooting schedule. Now, to do a proper film budget, like a line producer would do, and you would hire a line producer and pay them $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, whatever, to do a preliminary budget, like a proper one. If you were like, had money and had your own big production company and a studio and a budget. But if you were like me and you had nothing, you know, you learned. And I was lucky enough to, one of my mentors. Oh, sorry, we got sidetracked. Let's pause on that one and go back to the whole point of all this Lucretia stuff. So I had written this play, and this friend of mine said, why don't you send it off to Robin Phillips? And I said, who? I said, that name's familiar. Yeah. And why do I know that name? And he's like, well, Robin is a very well respected theater director, and he's done some movies as well. But he was famously in Canada, he was the head of the Stratford Shakespeare Theatre Festival, which was fairly well known. You know, he was British, came out of the old Vic in London. You know, he's directed some very big names on Broadway, in theater in the UK and Canada, like big. And again, by the time I met him, he was semi-retired and you know, in his twilight years. Yeah. So we found out his address somehow. He called some friends and said, do you know how to get something to Robin Phillips? Blah, blah, blah. Here's where you send it. So maybe we sent it to one of his reps. His rep passed it on, whatever. Just with a cover letter. Hi, Robin. I don't know if this is of any interest to you, whatever. I wrote this play, Elizabethan verse. And, you know, I mean, obviously it would be really amazing if you could take the time to look at it. you know, I hope you enjoy it. I mean, I don't even know if it's any good, but, you know, something like that, you know,
Yeah.
like you're just, you know, would you mind taking a poke at it and
Yeah.
seeing? Well, he did, and he got back to me, and he's like, I read your play, and there are some places where it's actually quite well done,
Hmm.
and then there are a lot of places where it's total dreck.
Hmm.
Right? He said, but um, you know, if you'd like to, I'd be willing to meet with you, right? So we met for coffee. Next time I was back in Toronto at this point. This was after my first LA adventure in 2002. So this would have been right when I was trying to put my indie films together in the mid 2000s. And so we met, and Robin sort of became another mentor, and just like Leonard had in Los Angeles. And he, you know, he liked the screenplay much better. By the way, eventually I gave him that copy, and he was like, "Oh yeah, this is way better." I was like, "Well, it's kind of my second draft, you know, like, and it's not in Elizabeth or in, you know, stumbling Elizabethan verse, right? Like, I mean, but anyway, so just an interesting tidbit I'll share. We were talking about the light in the eyes and all these little techniques, and Robin taught me this. He told me this really interesting thing about. So one of the things you discover when you're directing actors, especially like when I made my movie The House, I had an ensemble of actors, an ensemble cast in most scenes, and every actor is a different animal. They're all different creatures, and they all react differently. So one actor, you could be like talking, you're coaching them or you're directing them in a scene, and you're like, I want this and this, and like the moment is about that, and da 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 da, right? And they're like, okay, I totally get it. Yeah, and then do it. Then the next actor, you have the same conversation with them, and you've overloaded their brain. They're like, no, you need to just tell me, like, keep it really simple, or now I'm going to be in my head, and everything I do is going to seem really fake and contrived. Right. So you got to figure out real quick as a director, how to talk to each of your actors, because they all require different treatment. Right. At least that's my approach, especially when you're dealing with an ensemble. If you can, because I think you'll get a lot more out of them. Right. Some directors don't even talk to their actors. They're just shooters, or they're just like whatever. Show up knowing how to act, you know, like hit your mark and bark, right? Yeah. Whereas I, being a little bit more of a artsy fartsy myself, I like to. I mean, I'm really on the actor side, having trained as an actor and having, you know, my own aspirations to give good performance. And if you can, and if you're the director, you theoretically have a vision for what the story should be and what those performances you're hoping to get out of them, or at least in a general sense, they're going to bring all kinds of amazing new things to it, and you want to be open to that. But at the same time, you want to keep them between the guardrails and kind of a guideline of where the direction you want them to go. Yeah. So if you can figure out a way to do that more effectively, then, you know, you're going to end up with a better, more cohesive, even story at the end of the day, hopefully, if your vision is any good. So back to Robin and his little thing. He said, well, I was telling him about, you know, different actors, and he said, well, there's this one thing, a little trick that I'm going to teach you. He's like, I had an actor in a scene and giving a performance, and we were doing take after take, and wow, my look, see, I have a light. Look how white look how. Oh
yeah, it's all blown out.
Yeah. Ghost hand. And he's like, they were like 95% of the way there. It was almost. It was the performance was good. They did a take. They did 2 takes, and they were so close to being, you know, there's good, and then there's that extra good. That like that. Oh, that's the Oscar winner. You know, like that's that's that next level actor, you know? Right. And he's like, and you want to get them there. He's like, but if you push them too hard, if you give them too much, you might unbalance them, and then they'll lose that energy that they're right in their pocket, they're right in the zone, and you don't want to screw with them. He's like, so I had the actor was sitting in a chair at a table talking to whoever was across from him, just like we are now over cameras, but same idea, right? Yeah. So he's like, I just wanted a tiny bit more energy from the actor. But if I said, give me more energy, then they would go too big probably. right? And then they would be like overacting,
Yeah.
blah blah, and it's all fake. So he's like, so instead of giving them an acting note, I went back to the camera and I looked through the viewfinder and I talked to my cinematographer, and then I came back to the actor and I said, could you just put your hand on the table just in front of you? Just put your hand right there. Like the actor had been sitting there with their hands sort of at their sides, resting on their legs. He's like, I just want you to put your hand on the table. But yeah, all right, yeah, that looks great. And then walked away and said, all right, going again. First position is like, rolling, go, action. It was a trick.
Yeah.
It was an actor note. It was but he's like, if I gave the actor direction, they would have gone over. They would have gone overdone it. So instead, I put their hand in front of them. That slight, so their hand being on the table in front of them, gave them a slight. They leaned forward just a touch, and they had a little more security and stability because they had something to lean on, and that gave them that just slight bit of extra intensity to the scene.
Right.
That brought it alive, that all of a sudden the things they were saying were so much, just that little bit of intensity that kind of, and as soon as they took their hand away, they were more relaxed, but and then they all of a sudden they had their hand there, and then it's just that extra little, just the most infinitesimally small amount of sort of intensity that he wanted from the actors from that moment, and it worked. But so it's I have a story about it. I've written, and it's supposed to go on my Substack, which I keep saying I'm gonna. I've got it all set up, and I never put anything on it. It's been like a year and a half now. But like Robin Phillips and the Actor's Hand, that's what that one's called. But I'll be nice. That'll be on my Substack sometime in 2027.
Well, I've always been really fascinated by sort of like the director-actor relationship, and I always love hearing stories from actors and directors about like what they want from each other. Gary Oldman told a story about what it's like working with Christopher Nolan, and he's telling a story. He's doing one of the Batman movies, and he said Chris Nolan he doesn't really talk that much. He doesn't give a whole lot of notes. And he also doesn't do that many takes. So he said, but Gary Oldman says it was one of the handful of times, because I've worked with him on 7 films or whatever, that he actually gave me feedback on my performance. And he said, we were shooting a scene, and he said, okay, let's do that again. Do what you did in the last take, but the stakes are higher. And like, that was it. That was the only no. But he goes, but that was perfect for me. That was all I needed
for Gary Oldman. Yeah, like if you're going to give Gary Oldman a note, right? You're just like, Gary, the stakes are just right. And the Gary Oldman, I mean, it's Gary Oldman.
Yeah,
right? So he doesn't need a director. A lot of actors do, or a lot of actors can give a decent performance without a lot of direction, especially these days. That's kind of how Hollywood works. You get a lot of these shooter directors, right, who don't really know how to talk to actors. So actors really need to be, on their game. Often they'll hire a dialogue director, an acting coach to be on set, right? Or these actors will go work with their acting coach, the day before their big scene to make sure that they got it right. And that's where they get their directing from. Because a lot of directors nowadays don't really know how to talk to actors. But I think a lot of actors can benefit from it if they have a good director.
Yeah. No, definitely. And so, and if anything, it seems like, even bigger actors are surprised when they have a director who doesn't give them much feedback. They're sort of like that. So Jamie Foxx told a story about when he was doing Django Unchained with Tarantino. And so he's telling the story on Howard Stern and how Tarantino was kind of a tyrant. But then he goes, but that's what I want. I want some where it's like, even if we're going over the edge, we're doing some really wild and crazy, even if it might be a failure, as long as like the director has a clear vision, it's like, I want to know, but like, you got to leave me there. So, so he seems to be someone who's like, I want someone who's going to like, micromanage a lot of what I'm doing. Because has such a clear vision, and when you buy into it, it's like, okay, cool, I'll do whatever the hell you tell me to, because this is your vision, and I'm all for it. So anything I can do. But whereas like,
actors are notoriously neurotic about their performance, right? And like, the last thing you want them doing on your film set is being completely in their own head, freaking out, wondering whether they suck.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you don't give them any notes, then they're just going to be like, I have no idea. And actually, having acted and directed at the same time, which is tricky.
Yeah, I bet.
And actually, on my movie The House, I got to say that a big thank you to my cast, because they basically most of my stuff, they basically helped direct me through those scenes. Like,
Right.
you know, I was the only one in the cast without a director.
Right.
So they were like, let's do another one,
Yeah.
But no, oh crap, what was the point of this? Tarantino, oh yeah, actors being neurotic, and if you don't give them a note, they're twisting in the wind.
Yeah.
They're gonna lose their minds. They're gonna become in their head, as they say. Like, oh yeah, so this was the point. A lot of actors will give a performance in a scene, and they'll be like, that was the one. That was the one. Nailed it.
Yeah.
Out of the park. That was the performance. You know what? Probably wasn't their best take. Because if they were aware of what they were doing, then they weren't fully committed to the scene.
Right.
It's the takes that at the end of the scene, you have no idea what you just did. You know, you said the words correct. You know, you didn't correctly. You know, you didn't fumble anything, but you don't know what just happened. You're kind of like, what just happened? You're like, you're in a bit of a daze.
Yeah.
That's when you were really in the moment, when you were really being the character, being the character, because you weren't watching yourself.
Yeah. Right.
The camera, with that light in your eyes,
it
can tell when you're not fully committed to that moment. It can tell when you're actually watching your own performance while you're giving it, and it looks fake. So the actors think they did the best job on take 3, but it was actually take 2 or take 5 where they were like, I don't even know what I just did. That must have been terrible.
Right. Well, I can only imagine
like,
about what it's like working with Clint Eastwood, because I mean, I heard that he gives almost no direction, and he almost never does second takes, apparently.
No.
So Tom Hanks
tricks people.
Yeah.
He tricks people.
Yeah.
Because most people give their best performance when they think the camera isn't rolling, because they're not stressed.
Yeah. So Tom Hanks told a story about how he did that movie. I think it was Sully, or I don't know. So he did some movie with Clint Eastwood, but he goes, most directors, they make a big deal. It's like, all right, lights, action, camera speeding. All right, action. So they make a big deal for each take.
The actor's all like freaked out now.
Where he goes, he'll start the camera. He'll start make sure everyone's starting, but he won't say action. He'll just come up to you and then just hear this quiet voice over your shoulder and be like, all right, go ahead. And instead of saying, all right, cut, he doesn't do that. He'll just say, all right, that's enough of that. And then Matt Damon told a story about working with Clint Eastwood. I think it was Invictus, and they did a take, and then Eastwood's like, all right, cool, let's do the next setup. And then Matt Damon goes, can we do just one more take? Because I don't think, I just want to try something a little bit different. And then Clint Eastwood says, what, and waste everyone's time? And he goes, okay, no, we'll move on. We'll do the next setup.
Well, and I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that Matt Damon is one of those actors who warms up. Who some actors will give you the best take during rehearsal, right? So secretly shoot the rehearsals, right? Like put some black tape over the little red light and tell your cinematographer, shoot the rehearsals. It's digital, man. We're shooting HD. Other actors might not even get going, might not get their rhythm till take 3 or 4. And Matt Damon, rumor has it, don't quote me, people out there on the internet, don't quote me on this. And Matt Damon, if you ever do watch this, I don't know, I'm just talking out of my ass. But rumor has it that he's one of the actors who gets more and finds his rhythm after a few takes. So you almost kind of got a budget for having a few takes with an actor like that, which is fine. In an ensemble scene, I had actors who one was good on the first take, one was good on the third, one you needed 7 to get them to that level of energy they needed for that scene.
Right.
So but no, there's Clint Eastwood is sort of famous for the whole like just to,
just real quick and dirty. Just like,
well, and you don't even know he's rolling and he's already moving on. You're like, what? I thought we were just rehearsing. No, it was great. You did great.
Yeah.
And you move on and you believe it because it's Clint, right? And if Clint says you did great, then you probably did. Because he's got a good eye, and that's, I think, part of it too, is that when you're with a director like Clint Eastwood or somebody who's really good with actors, who knows a good performance, as an actor, you're more comfortable and you're going to be more likely to give your good performance because you're not worried. You're not stressed out about, am I going to do a good job? You can leave that to the director to decide. And you're just going to focus on being real in the moment as your character.
Well, it's funny because I mean, I think there's a little bit of like a stereotype that actors can be, you know, especially A-listers can be fussy and this and that, and I'm sure that there's plenty of truth to that. But Chris Nolan was talking about how he shot, was it Insomnia with Al Pacino, and he said like that was his first big sort of studio movie, and he's working with Robin Williams and Al Pacino and Hilary Swank. So but he goes, he thought that he was expecting like not so much having to deal with a diva in Al Pacino, but sort of like. He's been doing this for decades longer than I've been around. He's gonna be he's gonna maybe take over a little bit. But he said actually Al Pacino loved direction. He'd go up to him after every take. Hey, so what do you think of that? What should I do differently for the next one? Should we do a couple more?
Well, Pacino loves the craft of performance and acting. Yeah. So.
Whereas Matthew McConaughey, he's been doing the podcast rounds lately, and he was talking about how it sounds like he likes direction, but he doesn't like straight up direction. He likes to, he said, manipulate me into thinking that move was my move.
Yeah.
But he goes, don't just tell me, hey, for this next take, can you do it louder? Can you do it a little soft? Don't tell me that. Like, talk to me, have a conversation with me, but manipulate me into thinking that what you want me to do was my idea. So,
yeah. If you can convince somebody that something was their idea, they're way more enthusiastic about doing it.
Right.
But and actors are, they all want to do the best that they can do, and they're working with different directors, and some of the directors they trust, some of them they don't know you. Again, a note for younger filmmakers and new directors, myself included. Like half of Hollywood, they look at your body of work and they go, well, I don't know if this director is any good or not.
Right.
So they're going to come to your set. Pacino going with Nolan, right? Like, I don't know this guy. Like, I'm used to working with Scorsese and Coppola. Like I know those guys, right? I trust them.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's it. Yeah, you're right. That like the actor director relationship is the actor needs to feel, I think, comfortable going out on a limb for you, and that you're going to make sure that they don't embarrass themselves while they're out there. Right. I mean, there's the famous Catwoman, Halle Berry Catwoman, right? Where, she went out on the limb, and she did as an actress. She went on a limb, and I guess it was a little bit too far out on the limb, and the director didn't really. I don't know who the director was. I can't offhand remember, but that was one of those sort of examples where they, but you want your actors to feel safe doing that, taking risks. Emotional, dramatic risks, and that doesn't necessarily mean going big, right? A lot of people think that means going big. We're all going to be Al Pacino doing his, Oh, hang on a second. Something's. Oh, there we go. Sorry, my email program just took over. My screen. I mean, it could be just a subtle moment that wasn't quite right for the scene. Or there was a dramatic choice the actor made that was brave, but contextually didn't work. And because they're coming at it as the character, and their job is to be that character. Yeah. And your job is to make sure that makes sense in context of the scene and the rest of the story. And often in film, as you know, you're often filming the movie out of order. You're not filming it chronologically. So you could be filming the last day in the story, the last scene in the movie on your third day of shooting out of an 8-week shoot. Right. Because that's when that location was available and all the actors line up. So you're shooting the end of the movie first and it's all out of order. Yeah. The actor is just going to be in the moment, right? And trying to give the best performance they can in that scene, and it makes sense. And sometimes they forget that, well, this hasn't happened yet. You're not angry at that person in this scene because this morning we shot a scene where that person pissed them off. Right. But now we're shooting the scene that happens before that pissed them off, and you're like, why do you have all this anger towards them? Well, because of it. And I'm like, yeah, but that hasn't happened yet in the movie. Yeah. Right. Oh shit. Yeah. Right. Oh, okay. No, you're still in love with this person. They haven't crushed your dreams and hurt your
Right.
heart. So you got to be like, you got to forget all the horrible things that they did to you this morning in that other scene,
Yeah.
and be back in love with them now, or whatever, or be their best friend. So like it's so I think your job as the director is to keep them keep them in context. Be the one with the greater vision, the grand scheme of the whole thing, so that they can feel comfortable digging up these emotions and just letting go of their own self or letting go of what they did this morning in that other scene.
Yeah.
And just being your good little puppet, for that afternoon.
Right. What's his who's the guy who did William Friedkin talked about working with various actors, and he seems like a very straightforward guy, just like do what the script says and do it with the time that we rehearsed, and then we move on, sort of thing. And so for him, is like, I don't remember which actor he was talking about, but I think he said Tommy Lee Jones was the type of actor where it's just like, okay, in this scene, you walk in through that door, you sit down, you say your line to the actress, you get up, you to the window, you think for a moment, you come back, and then you leave, and that's it. So and then Tommy Lee Jones will go, okay, I come in, I sit down, I say my line to her, I go to the window, I come back, I think for a moment, and then I leave. Got it. And then he does it, and then we do exactly, and then that's it. We only need to do 1 or 2 takes, and we're good. But if I talk to Benicio del Toro, he'll be like, how about I don't enter the room? How about when at the beginning of the scene, I'm already in the room, and instead of sitting in the chair, I'm lying on the floor. And he goes, and it's like, okay, now you're doing like all like going big, right? It's like, no, just we don't need to do. And
you're like, okay, an actor prepares, like.
and then he was talking about, I think, Nick Nolte, who said that who likes to write like book length biographies on the characters that he plays.
Oh yeah.
And say, hey, I want you to read this, and he said, yeah, I read the first 5 pages and then I threw it because it had nothing to do with the actual context of the scene. I don't need your backstory. I just need to do things. So the next day we come to shoot, and because Nick Nolte will come up to me, hey, did you read the biography of my character? And I said, yeah, it's great. So in this scene, you're going to enter through the door, you're going to sit down at the table, you're going to say your line. It's like, yeah, I don't need all that. I just need you to do what the script says, and then we're good. So
right, and every actor's got their process, right? And this is what they're trained to do, though. That's the thing. They go to these acting classes and they make strong dramatic choices for your character, right? Be the character, like develop a backstory. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense. They're even told this. It doesn't matter if your choices don't make sense to the scene. As long as they're strong choices. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I've seen acting teachers say that so many times.
Right.
And I think that works maybe for auditions.
Sure. Makes you stand out, right?
Yeah. And they're like, well, that's not really what we were looking for, but it's amazing. And now that we're going to give you some direction. And that's where, if you can take the direction and give them what they're looking for, you've wowed them with your acting prowess,
right?
With your actor, your acting. You're schmacking. But you've but now can you give them a performance they want that makes sense to the character in the scene, right? And can you walk in, go to the table, sit down, say the line to the actress, get up, walk, stop for a minute, look up, and also you want to do all those things in film consistently in every take, because they're going to do it in the wide, they might pick it up in a medium, there was going to be a close-up, and maybe they're going to do an insert shot of your hand picking up the spoon on the table and fiddling with it for a second, and then you look up and then walk out. So they may shoot it from 4 different angles, and you have to do it identically every time so that the continuity matches, and they can cut between each camera and make a scene that flows.
Right.
And so, like, literally, if you're talking, and you're saying a bunch of words, and you drink from the water bottle, right? And then you're talking and you say a bunch of words, and you drink from the water bottle and you're talking and you say a bunch of words. Yeah. So after, you got to drink from the water bottle after you say the words, right? Like you got to do it exactly the same timing, because otherwise it won't cut together. You're going to be drinking from the water bottle in 3 different places and 3 different cuts, and then your editor is going to lose his or her friggin' mind.
Right.
And it'd be a mess of the scene. Your script continuity person is going to be like, can you drink the water at the same time? So yeah, I mean, film acting is technical in that sense. Right. And Tommy Lee Jones, Tommy Lee Jones is one of those guys who could like just read the newspaper and make it sound interesting.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Right. So he's a great workhorse. He comes in, he does the thing, and he brings that kind of like his natural gravitas to every role. And I mean, he is a consummate actor, and he's bringing things to it. But yeah, you can direct him that way. And he's cool. Benicio is going to want
chew the scenery a bit.
Yeah.
I think it was Donald Pleasance when he was doing the 1979 version of Dracula. Apparently, he would. It was not in the script or anything, but nor was it like a note from the director. But he would eat candy like while shooting. So like his character would just always have like a little bag of candy or treats, whatever. And apparently, it was so that he could get more screen time for editing purposes, where it's like, or something like that. There was some way where it's like, I'm going to force them because I had candy in that one shot, and there's something like that where it's like he doesn't.
And if you're eating the candy and you pause, before you put the piece of candy in your mouth, probably, and then now every shot, they're gonna have to wait for that pause, and you're gonna get that dramatic Pinter pause, that moment.
Yeah. But apparently, it was some weird little trick that he pulled so he can get a little extra screen time, because it was a small role, but it was like, okay, well, I was wanting as much screen time as possible, so I'm gonna make it really difficult for your editor to cut away from me. So
very clever, right? Make sure he milks his scene out to be as much as me. If he, maybe there was like something in the contract. Look, if I get more than this many seconds of screen time, you pay me double.
Right?
Who knows?
Right.
I mean, there's all these little tricks that people do, but.
Well, I think this is a good place to wrap it up, man. But thanks a lot for coming on, man. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. It was fun to do a light one and not get too heavy into politics this time, and and just shoot the breeze about crazy Hollywood adventures.
Definitely,
that was chapter 1. My next foray into Hollywood happened a few years later, and we'll cover that on a different one.
Yeah, I'd love to, man. I know I won't say much about it. I'm sure that you've got plenty of projects kind of in the hopper. So best selection on those. And obviously, when these get out there, hit us up, man. We'd love to have you back on and help promote what you're working on and stuff. So,
well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I know I got a number of things I'm working on and hoping to get them out to the world soon. It's the last few years have been interesting, and in this post-COVID mess of a world, trying to put our lives back together. And some people are doing really well. Some of us are, still starving artists, and we're all living the dream, right? Hashtag living the dream. So there's like no sarcasm at all. Right, living the dream. But no, it's good. It's fine.
All right. Well, thanks again, man. And we'll do this again sometime, dude.
Right on. Appreciate it. All right. Take care.